I always trusted God's call and knew that even if I wasn't in agreement with the polity, that God would get me through that. In seminary, I will be honest, it was a rough road because I was outed in seminary and almost kicked out and not allowed to be ordained. But again, the Spirit moved, made a path. I was able to be ordained and come to Presbytery of the Western Reserve directly from seminary, and have spent my career here for 36 years. But I will say that it was evident after my first two interim positions that the Presbytery said that even though they would help support me, that in that I was out at that point, to people in positions of authority, that they would not allow me to take a settled call.
In 1976, the UPC-USA developed a task force to study homosexuality. And my mother was picked to serve on that commission task force. And apparently I attended some of their meetings at 3 years old. While that didn't necessarily affect the direction my life would take, one thing it did do was instill in my parents an incredibly strong welcome and love for our LGBT brothers and sisters.
And there was a big issue around homosexuality at the time. A big report that was, interestingly, it wasn't accepted, but the General Assembly did suggest that people study it. And Noble Road was always the kind of church that if the General Assembly said you should study a topic, we actually would. So we had a adult education series. It was actually 12 weeks in the winter and spring of 1992. And at the end of that series, an elder said, we should look into becoming a more light church. And I think Mark and I kind of went gulp. At the time, that was considered kind of dangerous. But so we went through several years of study, and the congregation was always very supportive. I was thinking earlier in preparation for this that sometimes people would say, you're courageous to have taken up this topic, but it was the congregation, really, the session in the congregation that decided we needed to grapple with this. And they were always very supportive. I know folks who were from a more conservative, sometimes called evangelical perspective, that got themselves convicted that they needed to change their position. It was way harder on them than it ever was on us.
To be honest, I even left the denomination for 5 years and went to the UCC after Matthew Shepard. After he was murdered, I realized that I couldn't allow a majority of people in the presbytery to let me pass, that I needed to be fully out in the presbytery, and actually did come out in a full presbytery meeting in front of everyone, and was actually supported incredibly, beautifully well by the majority of the presbytery. And I'm grateful for that. But I eventually realized I was paying too high of a internal spiritual price with the pain of constantly being at odds with the polity and constantly being, anytime somebody could have an ecclesiastical council and get rid of me.
My call story is interesting, much like most of my life. I went to Kent State. I was a peace and conflict studies major with a strong bent towards social justice. And I had a philosophy minor where I was introduced to the writings of Paul Tillich and Martin Luther King Jr. And I finished college like most people did in 1996 and said, well, this isn't going to get me very far. And so I started thinking about, I also had studied a lot of juvenile justice and thought I might like to be a juvenile probation officer. I was told that I wasn't a good fit. But I started thinking about the things that were important to me, which were, again, social justice, philosophy, and really the idea of translating what I knew of to be my faith into language that people who were either unchurched or I sometimes referred to as anti-churched, that there was so much truth in secular writings that I also found in sacred writings, and how to be a bridge between those communities, how to help people understand that, being faithful isn't just about saying you love Jesus and acting however you want, but that it actually can make a radical change in how we live.
And when the polity changed in our denomination, I knew that I needed to come home. And so that pathway again cleared easily, and I saw the Spirit moving, and I came. But I guess oddly enough, or maybe sadly enough, the heads of the Presbytery at that time said, even though you're coming back, even though the polity's changed, hearts and minds do not change as quickly, not that the polity changed too quickly, and we cannot allow you to take a settled call at this point. So I stayed in hospice ministry, and then when they finally said that I could look for a call, both churches in the Presbytery that had me down to the last two people were honest with me and said, we don't think our congregation's ready yet to have a married gay, openly gay pastor. Until 4 years ago, when First Presbyterian Church in Cleveland, the Old Stone Church, was interviewing people, I put myself out there, even though I had come to terms where I really believed then that I would retire from hospice and not be in settled ministry ever. And I had made peace with that. And so the day that I was the head of the pastor nominating committee was meeting with me and offering me the position, we talked for an hour, and I said, well, thank you for at least allowing me to go through the process, and I really appreciate you letting me down easily. And he looked at me and he was like, letting you down? He goes, we're offering you the position. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And he goes, no, we're offering you the position. And I burst into tears. He burst into tears. And I am the senior pastor now for 4 years.
The first time we had a Presbytery group do the Pride March, I want to say we had 9 churches. This year we have at least 18 churches that are going to march behind the Presbytery flag, and hopefully next year it'll be 30. So, but
Absolutely.
that's the vitality we're looking for.